Story 1. I only vaguely remember this from when I was little. At the time, I was maybe 7 years old. Our house was old, full of dark corners and hidden secrets. My room was on a separate floor, almost like an annex to the attic. It wasn't exactly a bedroom, but more like a large closet that had been renovated. The people who lived in the house before us had used the space as a playroom for their daughters. My room had a huge built-in closet that was directly connected to the attic. The closet was elevated, and to enter it, you had to climb a small set of stairs. The sliding door was large and heavy, and the inside was completely filled with toys and other childhood junk. Ever since I moved in, I had always been afraid of being so isolated from the rest of the family, with that enormous closet looming over me like a silent threat.
It was on a night like any other that it all began. I had just finished watching a horror movie with my family and was lying in bed, trying to convince myself that it was all just fiction. But then, I heard it, a sound coming from the closet. It was as if a toy had moved on its own, or maybe fallen from a shelf. My heart started racing, and I jumped out of bed, running to my parents' room. They calmed me down, saying there was no one in the closet. Seeing how scared I was, they took pity on me and let me sleep in their room that night. The next day, I tried to convince myself that it had all just been my imagination. Unidos, o ChatGPT dis. The next night, I had almost forgotten about the incident, until I heard it again. This time, it was the sound of a container of Legos being knocked over, the pieces scattering across the closet floor. My blood ran cold. I ran to my parents' room again, begging for help. My dad was starting to lose his patience with me, but reluctantly, he agreed to let me sleep with them again. The next day, my mom and I checked the closet, and there it was, a pile of Legos scattered across the floor, spilled out of the container. I was convinced this was proof that someone, or something, was in my closet. But my mom insisted that the container had probably fallen on its own, maybe because it hadn't been placed properly. That night, my dad decided to lock the closet door. He was tired of my nonsense, as he called it. I lay in bed, trying to convince myself that I was safe. But the silence in the room was oppressive. I stayed there, completely still, my child's imagination running wild, waiting for another sound to come from the closet. About an hour passed before the silence was broken. The sound was so loud it felt like it echoed in my bones. The closet door slid open forcefully, creaking along the rusty tracks. The moonlight streamed through the window, illuminating the figure that was now standing in the closet doorway. It was a tall, thin figure with disproportionate limbs and a hunched posture. Its eyes gleamed in the dark, reflecting the moonlight like an animal's. I let out a scream, the most horrifying scream I had ever made in my life. A scream that came from the depths of my soul, filled with pure terror. The figure leapt from the closet with unnatural agility, sprinting toward my bedroom door. I watched it disappear down the stairs, its rapid footsteps echoing through the house. My dad ran after it, trying to catch the intruder, but he never found them. The police were called, but they never discovered who or what had entered our home that night. Years passed, and I never forgot that night. The house was sold, and my family moved away. But to this day, I still wonder what really happened. The closet was connected to the attic, and the attic was a place we never fully explored. Sometimes I dream about the figure, its glowing eyes staring at me in the dark. And whenever I hear a noise at night, my heart races, and I wonder if that thing is still out there, waiting. Years later, as an adult, I decided to return to that house. It was abandoned, with broken windows and overgrown weeds surrounding it. I climbed the stairs to my old bedroom, my heart pounding. The closet was still there, its sliding door slightly open, as if inviting me inside. I knew I shouldn't, but something pulled me in. I climbed the closet steps and entered the attic. The air was heavy, and the smell of mold was unbearable. In the darkest corner, I saw something that made me freeze. It was a pile of old toys, including the container of Legos I remembered so well. And next to it, a hunched figure, its eyes glowing in the dark. It stood up slowly, and I realized it had never left that house. It had been waiting for me all along. Now, every time I close my eyes, I see it, its glowing eyes, its slender silhouette. It calls me back to the attic, to the closet, and I know that sooner or later I'll have to go back, because it never really let me go. Story 2. My school library stays open until 2 a.m. for students like me who leave everything until the last minute. It's a small building with most of the books stored in the basement, an area called the stacks. To give you an idea of the layout, there's a large main staircase that leads down to the stacks, a room with vending machines, and a long hallway with 4 entrances to the stacks. The stacks consist of 2 large rooms on opposite sides of the hallway, filled with bookshelves and study tables lined against the walls. That night, I was there around 11 p.m., working on an intensive research paper. I preferred to stay in the stacks at one of the study tables so I wouldn't have to keep going up and down the stairs. I had been there for about 2 hours, and most people had already left. Only one other guy remained, sitting a few tables down from me, also buried in his books. I was completely distracted trying to finish my paper for an 8 a.m. class. Time was running out, and panic was starting to set in. That's when I heard it. Someone was flipping through book pages very quickly, making that loud, crisp sound of pages whipping past each other. The noise was coming from the other side of the room. At first I tried to ignore it, thinking the person would leave soon. But the sound continued, persistent, as if someone was frantically flipping through book after book with urgent desperation. After about 5 minutes, I was already irritated. I stood up and started walking toward the noise, determined to ask them to stop. But as soon as I took 3 steps, the sound stopped abruptly. The room fell silent again. I went back to my desk, relieved, but the silence lasted only about 10 minutes. Then the noise started again, louder this time, as if someone were flipping through the pages of a massive book. The guy sitting a few tables down seemed bothered too. He stood up and started walking between the shelves, trying to locate the source of the sound. I got up as well, determined to help. The noise was so loud that it was easy to tell where it was coming from. We walked toward it, each of us on opposite sides of the shelves. But as soon as we sat down, the noise started again. This time it sounded much closer, almost right next to the other guy's chair. He quickly packed up his things, looked at me and said, "This isn't normal. I'm out of here." Then he bolted. I didn't need any more warnings. I grabbed my stuff and ran after him maybe 5 seconds later. Since that night, I've never gone back to the stacks at night, even when other people are there. But what haunts me the most is what I found out later. The next day, I asked the librarian about the noise. He went pale and told me a story I will never forget. Many years ago, a student had disappeared in the library. He had been working in the stacks just like I was, and was never found. The only thing he left behind was a pile of open books, their pages flipped through chaotically, as if someone had skimmed through all of them at once. Since then, there have been reports of strange sounds in the stacks, especially at night. Some say it's the lost student, still trying to finish his work. Now, whenever I walk past the library at night, I feel a presence in the stacks. Sometimes I hear the distant sound of pages turning, even when no one is there. And on especially quiet nights, I could swear I see a figure between the shelves, flipping through books with desperate urgency. I've never gone back to the stacks alone. But sometimes, when I'm in the library during the day, I get a chill down my spine, like someone is watching me. And when I look toward the shelves, I see an open book, its pages slowly turning, as if an invisible hand were flipping through them. Now, whenever I hear the sound of pages turning, my heart races, because I know he's still there, in the stacks, trapped in an endless loop, trying to finish the work he never completed. And sometimes, I wonder if he's trying to warn us about something, or if he's just waiting for company.